Hi everyone, this is Lotta Hawkins. I wanted to do a quick video on freight broker insurance. A common question, what is it that I need? What do you need in regards to insurance? So the only requirement to activate your freight broker authority per the FMCSA is just a surety bond. But many people have kind of a misunderstanding of the difference between a bond and insurance. So a surety bond is what supports the license or the permit in order to operate as a freight broker. If you've done a fair Google search in regards to where to find a surety bond, you'll notice that it's listed under a license or permit type bonds because there's many different types of bonds. It does not in itself offer extended protection in regards to your professional errors, which is like clerical mistakes or miscalculations. It doesn't offer any of property damages that you may incur or other types of business operations. So I copied this definition directly from a financial services dictionary. So surety bonds are there to provide financial guarantees that other contracts and other business deals will need in order to be completed per the mutual terms. So surety bonds are there to protect the consumers or the government entities from any fraud or malpractice that takes place from the broker themselves. So when a principal breaks the bond's terms, they are the harmed party that can make a claim on the bond to recover losses. So as I said, that was the Financial Services Dictionary definition, and I'm going to go into that a little further with this chart. So I wanted to give the resource of this chart, which was suretybonds.com/insurance, because this is just a graphical way to compare a surety bond to insurance. So let's look at the top. So a surety bond, as mentioned, has an obligee, which is the freight broker that requires the bond. Well, excuse me, the obligee is the FMCSA. So they require the bond in order to activate an authority. The principal is the freight broker, the person in need of the bond. And the surety company is the insurance company, or however, it could be just a surety company. They don't have to be an insurance company that actually offers bonds. So you have a three-party involvement. So what's guaranteed? So a surety bond is guaranteeing that a certain financial eligibility for that $75,000 is available on behalf of the credit check of them doing everything they need to do in order to provide the bond. But that is being held kind of in trust or in escrow, if you want to call it that, by the surety company for the commitment of the principal. So who is protected? So who is actually protected is the party or the other company, the shipper, or other type of relationship that is going into business with the principal, who is the freight broker, for their services. So again, the principal is not protected with the surety bond. The freight broker is not protected with this surety bond. In fact, as the bond is being called upon or used for a claim, if you look at the last field on the far right, who is responsible for the claims? The principal is the one who must cover any losses as a result of the claim. So, quick reference, I used to be a bail bondsman in Louisiana for several years. So, bail bonds insurance or bail bondsman license is actually an insurance license, which I didn't know I would end up here all these years later. So, a bond, as a criminal bond, is a financial amount set in order to have someone released from jail, with the promise that they will return at a later date for their day in court. So just saying, like a disturbing the peace bond would be $500 on average. So if you got locked up in jail to sit in jail for a disturbing the peace charge and your bond was available to you for $500, you have two choices. The first choice is to come up with the $500. You'll then go ahead and get someone else, because you still have to get a third party person to be responsible with you as well. So you had to get what we call the surety. You had to go get, your cousin or somebody to use your money, or again, to use their money for that $500, and also sign off that they agree they'll help you get to court. So once you go to court and have your charges done, but that bond itself, whether it doesn't really matter what happens in court. If you're found guilty, you're fined. That's something totally different. If you're not found guilty, you'll have court costs, which is something totally different. But you will receive your $500 back for meeting that commitment of showing up at that particular day and time for court. So if you put up your own $500, then you will be able to get it back. The same thing kind of worked when someone had to call a bail bondsman. They would have a choice to bond out via a bail bondsman who comes and charges them a fee in order to write a surety bond. So when we did it, usually anything of a bondable amount of $1,000 or less was a flat $100 fee. So we would charge $100 non-refundable to be able to write a surety bond for $500 that would go to the court. So come the day of the court, if the person does not show up, then the court receives their $500 as fully earned. And then the insurance company, the surety bond company in which we were working for as bail bondsmen, would then write us an invoice for $500. Our person didn't show up, they had to pay $500, therefore we have to pay $500. And the same works for your bond. Any losses, they'll turn around and ask you for. So you are on the line as a freight broker for up to $75,000. So let's look at insurance. So insurance, who's involved? The consumer and the insurance company. So you have basically two parties involved. Yes, there's an agent and an agency. We're just kind of facilitating the process, the transaction of purchase, but we're not part of the contract. So that's why you don't have the agency or agent listed. It's basically the person who needs the insurance and has the insurance written in their name or their company name, and then the insurance company themselves. So what's covered is losses. So anything that happens that is under the scope of their business, fire, property damage, different things can go under this type of loss. It all depends on the type of policy you have. Who is protected? The policy is written specifically to protect the consumer. It's written to protect them from financial loss. So if there was a loss of property of $10,000, again, they have a policy for $100,000, then there would be, the insurance company would go ahead and write the check for the $10,000 to buy back or replace the property for the consumer. The consumer would have a brand new or next to new type item, and then they just go about their merry way. One of the ways you kind of know if it's ongoing is because the insurance company charges a monthly premium. Yes, you could pay it off for the year, but more or less they're paying a monthly premium to continue offering coverage protection. So with that being offered, they don't go back. It's illegal for the insurance company to go back and ask you for that $10,000 in which they paid, unless they found out through investigation you had some hands into, fraud, that you burnt up your own property for $10,000 so you could get the insurance check. And then you use that insurance check to do something other than replace your property. So there's cases, it's not just free money, but there's cases where, you would have to pay back some losses, but for the most part, if an insurance claim was done, you do not have to pay it back. So for those $1 million policies, you don't have to pay back $1 million to the insurance company. That is why they're charging you your monthly fee So in the case that they need to make a payment, that monthly fee kind of pays for the things that they are online at risk to cover for you. So I do understand, surety bonds and insurance is very confusing, but hopefully this diagram here and this resource of suretybonds.com provides more light with the difference of the two. Where can you get a bond? So any commercial insurance agency, because it is a financial product, is able to sell a bond. But I've listed here on the slide 3 of my recommended companies that really work solely with bonds. And so they have a lot of flexibility in regards to payment plans and the types of bonds they offer. Although the type of bond you're going to be asking for, the BMC 84, is the same, based on credit, each one of these companies has a different credit qualifier to see how much you'll have to pay in order to get the bond. So the first company is JW Surety Bonds, PFA Protects, and then suretybonds.com. All these bonds can be purchased instantly online. If you submit an application and you don't get an email basically giving you some type of figure within the hour at the longest, something didn't go through. All of this should have been and could have been done instantly. And even when you apply with a commercial insurance agency, if you are waiting 2-3 days to hear something back, then something didn't go through, because it's pretty much an instant process. As I said earlier, bonds have an indemnification clause, which just means that they're going to ask you to pay towards a claim that they've paid for on your behalf. So one of the benefits of a bond is, as I said, with that bail bond situation, they will pay the day of damages. They are guaranteed to pay. That's really what their business is. But then they give you a certain time frame to pay back the damages. And like in bail bonds, we had a 6-month period to pay back those costs that we lost. And a lot of times what we had to do was just rewrite another bond with a new court date and then surrender, as we called it, the client to the jail system in order for that new bond to take place. So that was just a process for us to do to save our money, but they did come back and ask for the payment. So what are some types of insurance? Again, this presentation is focused on the types of insurance that freight brokers more often need. I have to start with just saying that the insurance requirements in order to do business with a shipper do vary depending on what type of business the shipper does. So it's really a good practice for you just to consult with the carrier, the insurance specific portion of the carrier packet to get their specifics. They will always have it clearly written, even if it is a little bit in insurance language, but they will have specifications on what they're requiring of you in order to enter a contract that requires a certain type of insurance. So for brevity, I'm going to touch on 3 types of insurance in this presentation. That is general liability for freight brokers. You have to be specific when we talk about general liability being specifically for freight brokers, and I'll explain more in a few. We're going to talk real briefly about contingent cargo, and then lastly about contingent auto, and then lastly about contingent cargo. So general liability, what is general liability and why do you need to specifically get freight broker general liability? So freight broker general liability is designed to cover the premise exposure within the physical offices of a freight broker. There can be some extensions, but it's not meant to cover a warehouse. It's not meant to cover, the operations of inside the truck. It's just limited to the exposures of the offices of the freight broker. It's intended to cover that financial risk and responsibility for third-party claims of bodily injury or property damage. So you want to make sure that your policy specifically covers the duties of a freight brokerage. If you ask for general liability and you just say that you're a storefront, and they're supposed to ask you, and there's really not too many times that they don't ask you, and it should be a red flag if an insurance company does not ask you for your business classification, because there's so many different types of business. But when you select what it is you do, make sure that you're selecting freight brokerage or transportation arrangement, but be careful even with that second one, because freight forwarders also arrange for transportation. So your general liability coverage extends over employees and owners and operators of the company, of your freight brokerage, not contractors such as hired motor carrier drivers. A motor carrier actually needs their own general liability policy, and it would be good practice for you to make sure that all the carriers that are contracted under you carry a general liability policy as well. It does not cover the broker's own property. So if there were damages made, again, to their office computer, this policy doesn't cover for damages on that. It's only for third-party exposures. If you were to rent a computer and during that time of a rental, something was to happen to the property, then this general liability would provide you some protection. But otherwise, it would not have any coverage. Also, there's some money built into the policy for medical payments. This many times will save you from a workers' comp lawsuit. If one of your workers got up and accidentally had some boxes fall on them because you just had some boxes stored up of paper in the corner of your office and they got hurt, your general liability policy, typically up to $5,000, can provide coverage for their medical bills. And lastly, the most common limits to ask for in a general liability policy would be $1 million per occurrence with a $2 million aggregate. The word aggregate just means total. So be careful with the wording on this, because a lot of people will think they need a $2 million policy, which wouldn't be harmful, but it's double coverage from what most people see. The exposure is for a $1 million per occurrence. It pays out the $2 million. And also you need to request that $2 million aggregate, because a lot of times you'll have policy quotes start at $1 million with $1 million. So that's how it's often phrased with a general liability policy. You'll say, I have a general liability policy with $1 million, $2 million. Right? General liability quotes can start as low as $350 a year. There are monthly payments available. And if you wanted to apply directly on your own, you could visit our website or click on this link. If you have a copy of this presentation, it will take you to a self-service portal that is hosted by our agency. So that way, as you have any questions or get stuck possibly in there, we'll be able to go in there as well and help you out with making sure you have accurate coverage. So the next type of insurance I want to talk about is the contingent auto. It's going to feel like I'm reading most of this slide because I just don't want to mince the words, and it's just to go again to show the importance of just following the policy rules in regards to a contingent auto policy. So this type of policy responds in defense costs from first dollar plus any judgments that are levied when a freight broker is named as a defendant in a lawsuit that was related to bodily injury or a fatality claim, when the motor carrier they've contracted was involved in an accident and other third parties were injured and killed. As you hear, it is very specific. So this is a secondary policy, meaning that it only really pays out in excess of, above and beyond what the motor carrier's auto policy does not cover. This is not really a very common required or requested coverage, because most of the time those things fall in the lap of the motor carrier's responsibility. But if you know anything about lawsuits, they name any and everybody involved. So if lawsuits are a concern for you, I would recommend looking into getting a small business legal plan, into which where you can speak to a board advised lawyer that can give you some best practices, as well as just having them available when it comes time, if needed, to be your legal representation. So if you click on the link for here, we have a associate membership with Legal Shield, which offers very affordable plans and access to lawyers 24/7 all across the US. You'll have a home-based lawyer based on the state in which you sign up your policy, and they'll have an active line. There's an app, but there's a lot of different benefits, all for as low as $49.99 monthly, but there are different levels if you need to get more consultation hours or just had some other questions. And they go over anything in the area of business. So click here for a video, or just click on My Own Legal Plans if you're ready to register and see the different types of coverages available in print. Lastly, we come to contingent cargo. Now, cargo is probably, again, the name of the game of what you do as a freight broker, and the angst of confusion in regards to your relationship with both your shipper and your motor carrier. So these claims can be long, they could be litigious, and they could just really be outright frustrating because, the reputation out there, and then you're really just wondering how are the losses going to be settled. So contingent cargo is designed to cover the freight broker on a contingent or secondary basis for the cargo damage or loss. So that means that the motor carrier's policy is first attempted to pay out, and then as additional monies and circumstances may happen, then they look at the freight broker's contingent cargo policy for additional monies if needed. So it is commonplace to see that these claims are denied based on exclusions that may be present in a motor carrier's policy. Many types of contingent cargo does have their various forms of exclusion. Whenever you look at a cargo policy, you want to make sure that you're aware of what the exclusions are, because cargo is listed in like categories, and it's going to have a list of exclusions to where it very specifically says they will not cover or cover on a very limited basis. So I just want to talk a little bit more of when contingent cargo works. So again, it is not required in order to activate your authority. This is an added protection that covers you as a freight broker. So it kicks in, and it kicks in when it's assumed that you are looking for coverage because you are assuming the responsibility of lost cargo or damages that the motor carrier, their policy, has not paid. When the freight broker gets into a contract, the document should be carefully reviewed to establish whether or not they're liable under their authority, or would this fall under the motor carrier. These contracts again contain that indemnity clause that will cause you to be responsible for a cargo claim should the trucker fail to pay that claim. So this contingent cargo coverage is best used for FTL or full truckload shipments under most circumstances. But as I mentioned, and we'll show you here briefly, there is high-risk cargo such as alcohol, tobacco, expensive electronics, cell phones, copper, non-ferrous metals that require a broader form or type of insurance in order to make sure all of these are covered, and also that your policy doesn't reward theft. So I know that was a lot to say, and we'll go over this really quickly, but this is where a claims adjuster comes into the picture. At the time of a claim, you will have someone assigned to kind of go over the rules of your policy, the language of your policy. You will communicate with them many times one-on-one, as they work out the claims process, and they'll ultimately be responsible for the acceptance or declination of your claim. If there's any reductions to the claim, your claims adjuster made those changes. This coverage isn't terribly expensive, but it does vary on the book size because it's saying that there's more exposures if you're a larger freight brokerage. And also if you do any specialty loads, as we mentioned, as hazmat, if you're taking tobacco, if you're working with electronics. So monthly payments are available for this coverage as well. Let's talk about some common cargo exclusions. So as I mentioned before, these exclusions will first need to make sure that they're not on the trucker's policy, and then make sure that that policy and your contingent cargo policy don't really overlap to where they're excluding and there's a pure exclusion, that you want to make sure that yours kind of covers the things that the motor carrier does not. So one of the biggest ones that sometimes is often missed, and it's very specific with the pricing of your policy, is reefer breakdown. So refrigerated goods. If you are including protection for those refrigerated goods or not, you need to make sure, does your driver or your motor carrier have that on there if they're covering refrigerated goods, or do you have that? So you want to make sure that, like I said, if they don't have it, you definitely need it, but you want to encourage that they have it first and foremost. Here are again some common exclusions. You cannot haul for a basic price. Now, all of these that I'm about to go over, you can add, but it does increase the price of your cargo policy. So that's why I just put, if you're hauling anything on this list, that doesn't mean that you can't. It just means that you have to have a specialized policy to cover it. So money, all forms of currency, to include the original form of bills, letters of credit, and evidence of debt. So if you have like a original mortgage and you're carrying mortgage documents around, most likely those are excluded, because if something happens, it had an original signature that could not be easily replaced. Any type of jewelry or valuable art, any livestock, any AF or ATF items, the alcohol, firearms, and tobacco agency. So cigarettes, cigars, that's often on that exclusion list. Pharmaceuticals, furs or designer clothing, and we're not just talking on the level of Gucci and Prada, but anything of higher value, even Levi jeans. If you take a load of Levi jeans, those are considered designer clothing because it's a specific name brand, and so you might need to make sure you have that added coverage to cover their value in your cargo policy. High value electronics, tires or automobiles. Again, if you are an automobile hauler, you already really have that specification, and the motor carrier's cargo policy will expressly say cars. A lot of times when you haul cars, you're not hauling anything else. So even though it's an exclusion, if that's what they're in the lines to do, then it's already part of their cargo policy. Copper, again, copper being a metal of high value, is typically not covered. Motor homes are not covered. Steel and lumber are typically not covered. Same thing if you're a lumber hauler. You have to have really specific equipment, and a lot of times you're already rated. The cargo policy already takes into consideration that you're hauling lumber and logs and poles, and it will be on that policy, but you just need to check for the verbiage on your paperwork. And lastly but not least, hazmat. So this was a lot of information, and you're not expected, of course, to learn this in depth that the insurance professionals would. And so with Lovejoy Risk Management, we're both risk managers as well as insurance professionals. We help offer solutions via risk, our financial products that are, insurance policies that are able to take care of a lot of these risks, but they don't really completely alleviate the need for anything else. So some of the things that we offer specifically to transportation professionals is to monitor and review the legislation, the regulations, and new rules that come out. We're very much abreast of the new rules. We read about them all the time, so we will kind of let you know. Make sure you're keeping on top of the hours of service regulation that just kind of came out or was on pause because of COVID or because of this ice storm or this tragedy that happened, because these rules and regulations change all the time. So we'll give you a heads up on that. Also, assistance in evaluating the carrier packet. To, as you are working with your truckers, you want to be able to be confident on their safety records. You want to know how to read their certificates of insurance to include, as we mentioned earlier, general liability, the correct cargo coverages that are not going to show up solely on that FMCSA website. Some of those things require reviewing the actual policy, even more in depth than just the certificate of insurance, because the policy is going to have it where it's all broken up. Reviewing the agreements that you have with your motor carriers, such as providing advice on where to amend or how to negotiate the agreement to have wording that best protects your business. Also, in assistance of coming up with a model agreement as needed, and to evaluate again the phrasing, the wording to make sure it's advantageous to your business operations. Also, to make sure that those broker carrier packets with your motor carrier are in fact in language that protects your interest and your responsibilities as a freight broker and don't infringe on those of the motor carrier or vice versa. And then lastly, assistance with the resolution of claims, even the subrogation process, as just an extension of your services. As you notice, there's a couple of them, really the majority of them, that's offered in by asterisks, and that just says that we provide these services in collaboration with our partnership with Legal Shield, who provides the legal professionals, because that contract review and some of those specifics you should and need to, because it's an interpretation of law, have those reviewed by legal professionals. So if you don't choose to utilize some of the access that we provide, I just strongly suggest that you do more than just the copy and paste, because you may be leaving yourself exposed to other liabilities. So lastly, I just wanted to kind of share a little bit about myself in closing out this presentation. This is how you can reach me. My name, once again, is Lotta Love Hawkins. I am at Lovejoy Risk Management Corp., which there is our website and my email listed there. That is my personal cell phone number, so please feel free to text me first. I'm constantly on a phone or doing a presentation, so it's just always best to kind of text me so I know what area to get back with you on. And so when we do connect via phone, we're able to move things forward. I just had some personal things here on my bio because I know that we've talked enough about business now. And this just helps you better kind of connect and understand who I am as an individual. I want to be a resource for you. And hopefully that this video that I just shared has become one. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, but I wish you the best of success in your freight brokering adventures. Thank you.